Good morning, St. Mark's, and any of our friends who may be joining us in this virtual presentation midweek, almost at Thanksgiving time. We realize that the holidays this year will not be, for many of us, if not most of us, like they usually are, but we hope that they are something meaningful for you. It's an opportunity to be creative, but also cautious, and we hope that you are able to pull that off. We have a special guest today in the person of Father Bill Lane, an Episcopal Priest. He and I were chatting before we started, and we go back 40 years. We can talk a little bit about in what way later. But in the meantime, I want to welcome Bill to St. Mark's and to our little encounter here today.
Good to be here, and good morning, St. Mark's. Yeah, it's my first time. Actually, all these years I've been in Delaware, in and out of Delaware. This is my first time that I can remember being in this parish in St. Mark's.
Well,
so
as some say, it's about time.
I think so. Since I came to Delaware in 1975, I think it is about time I came. Right.
Yeah, you beat me by 2 years.
2 years. Yeah, you came in 77.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, where you grew up, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Baltimore boy. I was born in Baltimore City, and my growing up years were out in the county, out in Baltimore County, in a little suburb spot called Arbutus in southeast of the city. And grew up there, went to elementary school, then went to high school over in the next neighboring community. So I'm really a product of the 50s. I started junior high school in around 50, and graduated from the University of Maryland in the spring of 1960. So I'm a perfect 50s kid, So I went to University of Maryland and...
Majoring in what, by the way?
History.
Okay.
History, English minor. In those days, I don't know how they do it now. We had a major and a minor. And I was a history major and an English minor. And then I had been active in the Episcopal Church for a number of years. My mother and her sister were Episcopalians, and when I was a young kid, weren't doing much about it. But my aunt, who felt responsible, took me around the nearest church, which was a very fine Methodist parish. And I spent from probably age 5 or 6 to age 9 in the Methodist church. Meanwhile, my mother and aunt started going to the nearby little Episcopal church. And one of my young friends in the 4th grade Sylvia asked me if I went to Sunday school, and I allowed it. I didn't go to Sunday school. It's a big fib, of course. I didn't go to Sunday school. So she went and told the young priest at the parish that there was a friend of hers. Turned out his mother is going to church here. And so one Saturday morning, I was home alone, and a rap came on the door, and there was Father Morgan Smith, visiting me. So I was so impressed by the fact that this priest would come by and visit me that I told my mother and aunt that that's where I wanted to go to that church. And so from then on, I was into it. And by the time I was in my senior year of college, I pretty well narrowed down that I really wanted to go into the priesthood. And so I went through the whole process with the bishop of the diocese, and ended up at Virginia Seminary in Alexandria, Virginia. And that's where I went, graduated in 63. Seems like definitely a long time ago. And served parishes in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, and in 1975 came over to the Diocese of Delaware, and was in Delaware working for the bishop staff, and then at Christ Church Christiana Hundred, and then was elected dean of the Cathedral in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and was there from '97 till I retired in 2006. And came back home again to Delaware.
Yeah, you and I, to get a little bit more current, re-engaged each other when you were at St. John's as an interim, and I was at St. Stephen.
Absolutely. St. John's Cathedral, which is now St. John's Village, subsidized housing, fine, beautiful apartments, lovely. But anyway, St. John's was coming in hard times, and we kept it. I was there for 6 years. That's a pretty long interim.
Boy, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, 6 years. And but we finally just couldn't make it go. And so anyway, that's where I was for 6 years at St. John's when we reconnected.
Yeah. Back to the beginnings of yours and my relationship, we were recalling that we encountered each other first at meetings of the National Conference of Christians and Jews, Delaware region. And that was, in its day, the place for clergy and rabbis to get together.
Absolutely.
And tackle some pretty interesting, intriguing, and sometimes heavy issues. There weren't a whole lot of other contexts to do that thing. The ministeria had disappeared or dissipated. There weren't much of that in the area, and so forth. So I guess we both have something of a history of connecting with the Jewish Christian experience, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, both interfaith and ecumenical experience backgrounds. Yeah, and that was a wonderful, wonderful organization. And as you said, a place where we gather once a month, break bread together, and occasionally have serious programs. And it also sponsored, I remember once a year, it was big enough, going concern, sponsored, you might remember, dinner at, I think at the DuPont Hotel in the honor.
Oh, yeah.
And
sure.
have a big honor people in the community who had served the Lord in one way or another in the community. Yeah, that's, like lots of other wonderful things. It finally, I guess, ran its course, and
I sense that the impulse to network went into the wilderness for a while, and pastors, priests, and even rabbis perhaps were kind of just into their own institutions.
Yeah.
And now we're in an era where I believe networking is absolutely essential, and we've got to find ways of doing it more creatively and differently. We need each other.
Yeah.
I think it's fairly clear that that's the case.
Yeah, and I think truly interfaith, our experience was with the Christians and Jews, but today the Muslim community too, that making those broad religious connections, and I think are vitally important, and because religion is a great gift that God has given us. I mean, but it also can be used as a real detriment and a way of harming and hurting one another. And we know that from the story of humankind's religious experience.
Martin Marty, I don't know if you're familiar with Martin Marty.
Yeah.
Eminent historian, happens to be a Lutheran, but he wrote a book probably 15 or so years ago called When Faiths Collide.
Yeah.
And what brings that to mind is that one of the things he both lifts up and encourages is meal fellowship, that in each of those three traditions, at least Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, there's a strong sense of hospitality and so forth. And that while it may be a neighborhood thing or a particular parish and synagogue thing and mosque thing, and that's relatively small, it's still a start.
Yeah.
We need to talk to each other and learn a little bit more about each other in an up close and personal sort of a way.
Yeah, I think I think we need to begin building those personal relationships, and almost coming together without a huge agenda, just sitting down and talking and getting to know one another again as human beings and as people from their own traditions who believe in supreme being and a God of justice and mercy and hope and love, and just get to know one another in that fashion, building some trust relationships again.
Well, the three Brahmic faiths clearly have some things in common that you can begin to talk about that may not exist between any of the three, and some other expressions. Doesn't preclude the other expressions, but and I'm not real sure what has gone on in the broader community here between the Muslim community and anybody else. I just don't know.
Yeah. The Islamic community, the Muslim community in the greater Wilmington area has been active, and they've had various symposiums and gatherings, especially around when there have been times of either mosque problems, attacks on mosques or Muslims, and attacks on Jews or synagogues. And so there's an active group in the greater Newark area. There's a mosque there that's very active. And I've attended some of their.
Yeah, I was invited to their picnic one year. I couldn't go.
Yeah, and I know they have a relationship with the Jewish community, because I know I've seen Rabbi Beal there often. I mean, so he has I take it, a pretty close relationship with that group. Yeah.
This is an aside, Bill, but as you know, Peter Grumbacher and Sister Jean Keisman and myself teach this class at Osher. And while we have had Muslim guests in, and it's always very well received, by the way, the intrigue and the interest in finding out more has been very open. But the three of us go back so far, as long as you and I do, and breaking into that relationship.
That's right.
That's right. But what people have told us is, regardless of the content of what we may happen to be discussing or attacking on a given class, what they really appreciate is our relationship.
Yeah.
That we have built a sense of respect and honor and indeed love with each other, and we can disagree in a way that doesn't cause tension and conflict. And that's important. It took a while to do that, by the way.
You all have, I know, you all have been at that for a long time. Yeah.
So more recently, and again, you and I were, and it happened back then, as I recall, we got together both when you were at St. John's and I was at St. Stephen's, but at the same time, we were both invested in Churches for Middle Eastern Peace.
Yep.
Now, I was away from that for a while because I've sort of hung around in Pennsylvania, but I'm back. Had a hiatus there for a while, but I'm going to get back involved as we re-enter after first of the year. What has that organization meant for you in itself, but also perhaps, if you're able to do it, to talk a little bit about what that means to your Jewish-Christian relationship, and how they what's the word I want? Enmesh or don't.
Mm-hmm. Well, a little background. I first got engaged and involved with Israel, Palestine, Holy Land, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, any way you want to describe that wonderful, marvelous place, area of the world. In the early 80s, and I started going to St. George's College in Jerusalem, which is an Anglican continuing education
school. And I was there in 01.
You were there, and it's on the grounds of St. George's Cathedral, which is the cathedral of the Anglican Church, Episcopal Church in Jerusalem. And so I got initiated through that, and then over the years, probably every other year, I would go, and usually through St. George's, but occasionally under different auspices. And so I began to build a first-hand, in-person understanding, as much as one can, understanding what was happening on the ground there, both faith-wise as well as politically and socially. And one of the things that becomes apparent very early, not right off the bat, but very early, when one understands the plight of the Christian community in the Holy Land. I think the Christian population in the Holy Land now, in Israel, Palestine, is probably bragging to say 2%.
It's less than 1%. I learned the last time I was over there.
Yeah, so it was down to 1.5, and it's dwindled down to 1. So the Christian community there, the church, is under a great deal of stress and strain, and in a sense that's a tragedy, both for us as Christians, because we don't want all of a sudden to wake up one morning and all those wonderful, marvelous sites that tell the story of our Lord are museums, and you buy a ticket and you go in and see the museum, but no longer communities of worship where people gather to pray and to celebrate the great feast in such marvelous ways. So I was become aware of that and my need as a Christian, especially a Christian in the wealthy, powerful Western world, to identify with the Christian community in Palestine and Israel. The second, I saw that there were strains not only between the Christians and the Jewish part, in Judaism, Christianity and Judaism. There were strains between Christianity and Islam, but the strains were different kinds of strains, and the strains between Islam and Christianity were strains that were largely faith strains, and just because of the history of 2,000 years of engaging one another, and from times loving one another, at times almost hating one another. But the strains between Christians and Judaism, Christians, which translates between the Christian community in Israel and the state of Israel, were political strains, power strains, and the same kind of strains that were placed on the Muslim in Islam, the Muslim community. So we have this power. For example, the settlement movement is a political power movement.
Sure.
That belies any hope for the so-called two-state solution. At this point in time, there's no, personally, see no two-state solution. There's no place for a Palestinian state anymore, because the land that was the so-called West Bank, which was, after the partition, was down to about 22% of the land that was put aside for a Palestinian state. That has now been eaten into so much that there's, I don't know how much of that, but it's not much left. And it'd also be a Swiss cheese kind of thing because of the settlements scattered all through the West Bank. So I no longer put my eggs in the two-state solution basket. And so what I look at, where I put my commitment to, and I think Delaware Churches of Middle East Peace is there too, is to come down to the side of human rights and justice and peace for every living soul who lives in Israel, Palestine, who lives in Israel and the West Bank and in Gaza. Justice, equal rights, and human rights, and that's where my energy is focused now.
One of my frustrations, and I've had some similar experiences, as you know, and have some close relationships with some folk over there.
Yep.
Is that the Palestinian community doesn't seem to have had leadership that's been strong, or at least strong enough to engage with the very strong leadership of the State of Israel. then, of course, as we look at it from our perspective, the violence that has occurred there over the course of time, and as I shared with you earlier, it's always felt to me like the Ethiopians throwing spears at Italian bombers. It's just there's no equalness to any of it. My understanding also, however, is that there's a not insignificant peace movement among some Israelis.
Mm-hmm.
It's not large, but it's real, and I think they're striving for some of the same things that you just talked about. I'm not real sure the two-state solution may not be, and has not been anyway, a practical solution in terms of the boundaries and security issues and so forth, ever. It's never been that, and it's just gotten worse. But there's something about using that language of a two-state that implies parity somehow between the state of Israel and the Palestinians. I guess I'm not willing to give up the language just quite yet.
Well, I see my problem with it is that it's been used so long that, and so everybody bows to that one. And so Israel continues to, the state of Israel continues to expand the settlements, for instance. And we...
Now with American approval, by the way.
American approval. Before we'd slap their fingers, but now it's been approved. And so but then we say, but that means Palestinians and Israelis, they have to settle it, and so we say that the solution is the two-state solution. So we keep, for how many years now we've been talking about the two-state solution? And
decades.
Nothing's happened. I mean,
Sure.
nothing has happened. You're absolutely right. The leadership, the political leadership of the Palestinians is poor.
Sure.
Poor, weak, and hopefully there's some young Palestinian leaders who can bubble up, come up, and hopefully without violence, take charge. But right now, the leadership within the Palestinian community is pretty weak.
And Bill, correct me if you believe this differently, but the divide between Hamas and its supporters in Israel or in Palestine and Fatah being the traditional party of Arafat, both being geographically separated, with Hamas operating out of Gaza and Fatah being essentially in the West Bank. That only makes more complex an already incredibly complex issue.
Yeah. I mean, so it's and just from a pure political power move for the state of Israel, the government of the state of Israel, that works to their benefit because that's a divide that they can play against. They can play one off against the other, and so it's none of that's. There's nothing right now that looks promising. I may be a downer, but it looks promising for the Palestinians. There is a peace movement, as you said, within an Israeli peace movement, and it's a strong, meaningful movement, but it doesn't. It so far has been ineffective in making major inroads and changes in the thinking of the state of Israel.
One of its tenets, however, which I am intrigued by, is that the policies of the Israeli government toward Palestinians defies being Jewish.
Oh, yeah.
That Jews, at least ideally, are not to behave like that, being oppressors when they themselves have been so oppressed.
That's right. There's nothing in the story of Israel, Judaism, the faith movement, the prophets, that give ground and support to the present policies of the state of Israel.
And at the same time, I think you and I have been over there, and those who have not, it's difficult to appreciate the security questions.
Sure.
The Israelis are, well, I've been told that the Arabs or the Muslims have a couple of opportunities perhaps to come at Israel, but Israel has only one opportunity to protect itself, that if it ever falls, it's fallen for good. So there's a strong emphasis on security, and I get that.
Absolutely, I do, and I get the whole story of that we Western Christians are responsible for, in a sense, of the story of the persecution, the abuse of the Jews in Western Europe, and the whole refusal as the clear signs in the 30s what was become the policies of Nazi Germany, of Hitler, and refusal of the Western Christian world to even take in folks who came seeking asylum. You know, we had awful stories that we were too young to know personally, but it happened in our lifetime of Jews being turned back from the United States and sent back to what was awaiting their fate in Western Europe.
There is an inherent anti-Semitism within Christianity that is dreadfully unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's something for which we current Christians, it's not as if we can apologize for it, but we can certainly keep it from continuing to happen.
Yeah.
I just received an article from a member of a former parish I served in the Smithsonian at the Cathedral Church in Wittenberg, where Luther pounded the 95 Theses. There's still a plaque type thing, fresco, I get that word wrong all the time, that depicts a rabbi literally looking into the anus of a pig for truth. It's still there.
Still there, yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah, we're talking about taking down Confederate statues, right? And they have that awful thing. Right? That's right. Yeah. So anti-Semitism is alive and well, and that's scary for everybody because it does us, none of us any good. It's a thing we are, and it certainly is part of the tradition of the Western Christianity, anti-Semitism. So we have a lot to atone for, and as Christians, and yet also we also have to also recognize the needs and plights of others, i.e. the Palestinian community.
No question.
Too.
And there are Christians today who have a relationship with the whole question of Israel that's very different from, I believe, yours and mine. It requires, in order to pull it off, that is, that theology which pulls the state of Israel into the end times type thing. It requires, what am I getting at here? I lost it for a moment. I'm doing that more and more. Are you having
you're entitled to it.
I'll get it back.
Well, while you're pondering that.
Okay.
While you're pondering it, I brought along this book since I was coming to a Lutheran church.
Gotcha.
I brought this. I recommend this. Folks out there at St. Mark's, I recommend this. This book is by Munther Isaac, who is a Lutheran theologian, pastor in Bethlehem, and not Bethlehem of Pennsylvania like I was, but Bethlehem of Judea. And this book is called The Other Side of the Wall, and the wall, of course, is the barrier wall, whatever name you want to give it. But it's a theological treatise on the story of the Christian community, primarily the Christian community, and in its relationship with the state of Israel. And and he does a marvelous job of talking about things about like right of return. If he raises the question, if Jews have the right of return, how about his Palestinians? Do they have right of return? So it's well done, well written.
Is it recent?
Yeah. Let's see. And this is a paperback, obviously, edition. So well, this is 2020, and that's pretty recent.
Oh, yeah, it is.
That's pretty recent. So anyway, I recommend it highly. It's published by Varsity Press, I guess. And,
now, you and I both know Mitri Rahib.
Yeah, you know him well. I've met him.
Who is the pastor of Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem and has written as well. I mean, I presume they're colleagues.
They are. They know each other. In fact, this fellow looks at, Pastor Isaac looks at Mitri as a mentor. So,
I'm just wondering, I forget the name of the person who greeted us on my last trip over there. There were 7 people from St. Mark's on that trip, by the way. Mitri was out of town, out of state, even out of country, and one of his associates, and I was wondering if it was him.
Might have been. Hoping that we can get, virtually get him, maybe early in the new year here, to do a presentation for all of us.
We being the Delaware Churches
for the Middle East Peace, and maybe Delphur.
Say what that is.
Delphur is Delawareans for Palestinian human rights. Anyway, but do it because now,
excellent idea.
Now with all this wonderful Zoom and everything else that we have, we don't need to fly people around the world. We can do it. So anyway, but I recommend it, St. Mark's. Put it on your reading list. The Other Side of the Wall. Munther Isaac. There we go.
I remember what I was trying to say before.
Go for it.
In order for the theology that pulls in Israel to the last times and all of that, one must have a sense of equation of the state of Israel and the Jews, as is depicted in the Bible.
Yep.
And that's not an intellectually honest thing to do.
No.
The state of Israel has citizenry that are not religious for the most part, with the exception of the Orthodox. And, the Jews, it's awful difficult to define that in a theological sense. Jews even argue among themselves as to who is a Jew.
Yeah.
And so, and that's another unfortunate complexity, by the way, with the American position, politically or otherwise, about Israel, that the complicity, if you will, of certain Christians in believing that the Israelis can have virtually anything they want, at the expense even of indigenous Christians over there.
That's what he talks about in here. That's right. It's a crazy relationship between, Hagee, for instance? And his movement, which is a powerful movement, a branch of the evangelical Christian church. That relationship, they pump support and both financial support as well as political support for the state of Israel, and they support anything the state of Israel does, and they'd be happy as a dickens to see the Israeli army march up onto the Temple Mount and start a major conflict, because their goal is for the restoration of the state of Israel, of the temple and all that, to bring back the second coming. So the goal of Hagee and his folks ultimately is not for the good of the state of the Jewish people and a homeland for the Jewish people, but for bringing back the second coming and bringing the Messiah back and establishing the reign of, as he would understand it, I think, the reign of Christianity. That's that.
Bishop Munib Yonan, whom you know or know of, and I know well, once told me, by the way, the Anglicans and the Lutherans kind of hit the ground at the same time there.
That's right.
And have opted to cooperate rather than compete. So that's been a healthy relationship all along.
From the very beginning,
Yeah.
in the 19th century.
Sure.
Yep.
Anyway, he maintains that during his bishopric that his greatest problem were Christians who were trying to cause trouble and to bring about the second coming. Now, if you think about that, what could be worse than, quote, Christians trying to cause conflict?
That's right. To bring the Lord back.
Yeah, to bring the Lord back. I mean, as if we have control over that.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Delaware has a distinctiveness, it seems, that because of our smallness and our geographic proximity, we can have encounters with our political people, the senators and representative, and have had a history of that between the Delaware Churches for Middle Eastern Peace and those people that can't happen in Texas or wouldn't usually happen in Texas.
That's right. To Texas, California, even Pennsylvania.
So, Bill, it raises the question, and this can get cluttered for some people, but especially in terms of this issue, I don't think it is. Because the kinds of political moves that are made by the United States toward Israel have all kinds of significant consequences in the Palestinian community.
Yeah.
So one of our, quote, lobby interests is to get the Palestinian community on the front burner or right on the plate of the political people in this country. And that's not always been easy because of the perceived necessity, if you will, of honoring Israel as it's our best friend in the Middle East.
That's right. So that's right. As the only democracy in the Middle East, and of course it's a limited democracy because it's not a democracy for all the people who live in Israel, Palestine. And many people, the Palestinians on the West Bank are living in occupied territory. They don't have civil rights under the Israeli law. They're governed by military law. The Palestinians, not the settlers who live out on the West Bank, the occupied territory, are under Israel law and they're citizens of Israel. The Palestinians aren't. They live under military law, and even it impacts even children who get picked up and held in detention. And
it's brutal.
It's brutal.
There's no other way to describe it.
But the thing with our political leadership, you're right. So the knee-jerk reaction is that Israel is our best friend in the Middle East. Israel is our good friend, and so we may not like everything to do, but they just have to do what they need to do because they're in such a precarious position. And so our job is, and been doing it for almost ever since I got back to Delaware, is to at least present an alternative view, another possibility to our political leadership here in this country. So I've met numbers of times, you have, with our senators, Carper and Coons. We've met with our representative, Lisa Blunt Rochester, a few times.
And her predecessor.
And met with Governor Carney, to at least present the story. And I think just a little bit, have at least had a little bit of impact, and at least giving them cause to pause in that knee-jerk, and at least see that there is another side, another possibility. And now, of course, little Delaware has the next president of the United States, so who could have believed it? Who would have thunk it? In January the 20th. And so my hope is, back to where we started, is that we press over and over again for the human rights for everybody who lives in that land. Everybody who lives in that land.
And
equal rights.
Sure. One of the things that comes to mind is that President-elect Biden has a history of despising the settlements.
Yeah.
And seeing that as a very large inhibitor of peace over there.
Remember, he went as vice president very early, and he went over there, and while he was over there, Netanyahu and these guys announced the whole new settlement thing. While poor Vice President Biden was there, he talked about being sandbagged, blindsided. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, one other thing about Israel, and then maybe we can go back to states here a little bit, but it's been said that without a two-state solution, without some semblance of parity in terms of justice issues with the Palestinians, what you're going to get is a decision for Israel to make between being a Jewish state and a democracy. Mm-hmm. And the reason that question arises is birth rates.
Absolutely.
So that there will come a time, if nothing else is done, when the Arab Israeli population will be larger than the Jewish Israeli population, which means that the Arabs will be in the majority. What does the state of Israel do about that? It's got a decision to make.
Absolutely.
And some decisions in the meantime.
Yeah. And so do you start a process now of making that truly a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-political view state, and you begin to do it now and put into place the safeguards, the constitutional safeguards to make it truly a democracy, no matter who is in the which population has the ascendancy, mm-hmm. Palestinian, Arab, Israeli, Jew. You begin to build on that now, which takes leadership, which neither side has right now to do that.
Interested leadership.
Yeah. But that's otherwise. You're right. The population is maybe pretty close to a parity now. When you take the occupied territories and
sure.
Israel together, mm-hmm. And the Arab population is going to grow faster. So I think, if I were put in charge, that I'd want to begin now building into place the constitutional processes that would establish a place of a home for no matter who you were, whether you're a Jew or Arab, and where they could live in some security and a sense of freedom, and also justice and certainly peace. Now that's pie in the sky, I recognize, for most of us to think about, but I just don't see any other kind of good solution coming out of that. I can see all kinds of, I'm amazed at the Palestinian community, especially out on the occupied territories in the West Bank. I'm amazed that basically how cool they've held. They've held their cool. I mean, we certainly had some intifada a couple of times, but on the whole, they've stood up against. They've held their cool against a whole lot of oppressive action.
Well, and a lot of military might.
Yeah, and they're so far they haven't tried David and Goliath. They haven't picked up their stones. And
we sponsored Munib's son Andrew at Valparaiso University here in the States. That's my alma mater. It's a Lutheran school, and there were. I say this with great shame. There were about 60 other Arab students at Valparaiso at the time, and they treated Andrew very roughly. He was known as a sand. The language that was used. Now I think that's a symbol, though. When we look at the plight of the Palestinians, I think one of the things we have to understand is that while much of the rest of the Arab world has used them as an excuse to have anti-Israeli policies, they haven't opted to take care of the Palestinian people either.
No.
And the Palestinians tend to be thought of as less than. They are really in an isolated,
They are.
shameful position.
They are. And even what's going on now with the Arab Emirates and supposedly the Saudis now building relationships between the state of Israel and some of these Middle Eastern Arab countries, the plight of the Palestinians is once more being put on the back. Back burner. It's not part of the equation. It gets lip service, but it's not part of the equation. And that's happened to those folks from forever. But you can go back to 1917 in Balfour and then right on through into the division of the land in 47
by the
British. UN.
And British mandate.
Yeah, after the mandate closed. So they've been promised things along the way, but the promises have never been delivered.
Let me just say also, at a Jewish Christian workshop, and I attended a bunch of those nationally, one of the rabbis said that in order for Christians and Jews, in this country at least, to have dialogue and seeking some kind of positive relationship, we do not have to agree with the policies of the government of Israel. If we don't, as Americans, always agree with the policies of our own government, why should we have to agree with the policies of someone else's?
Yep.
So, I'd like to close this part of our time here, and we're almost done anyway, Bill, with just saying that you don't have to be anti-Semitic to be pro-Palestinian at any level. Our emphasis, our goal is justice for all parties, as you have articulated it, in that part of the world, because it seems like when things go wrong there, it affects us all. And if things could go right there, it could affect us all in a much more positive way.
Yeah, that's right. And I right on with that. It's not anti-Semitic to oppose many of the policies of the government of the state of Israel. That's not anti-Semitic.
Gotcha. Let's come back here for just a moment and say, what are you doing with yourself now other than Delaware Churches for Middle Eastern Peace?
Well, I continue, as you do, to flunk retirement. I retired in 2006 and almost immediately failed. And so right now I'm Rector Priest in charge of a little parish in Newark, Delaware called St. Nicholas. And I continue to help at Christ Church Christiana Hundred in Greenville. And we moved, Beverly and I moved back from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and Beverly, in 2010, after 3.5-4 years, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and so after another 2 years, it was time for Beverly to needed care, the more care than I was capable of giving over the long haul, and so Beverly now lives at Sunrise Senior Living, not all that far from here, and she's been there now 7 years.
Oh, wow.
And so definitely the Alzheimer's says she's deep into Alzheimer's now. So a big chunk of my time is with my work I do with the two parishes, mainly St. Nicholas, but a big chunk of my time then is being with Beverly, and I can
do that on a daily basis.
I can finally go now because of her condition. I finally can go and be with her daily. So I usually try to get there sometime around lunchtime and feed her. And
does she know you still?
Don't know. Remember, there's a big gap. I was from 1st of March until into September. I was not able to even go near her. I couldn't. So she didn't. So it was a long gap there.
Oh yeah.
I say I think she might, but I don't know. I don't know for sure. But so I go. I have to get in line with get the test for COVID-19 at least weekly. I have to be weekly tested. So, and if you've ever been standing in line, I know what it's like because I've been doing it too, right? So yeah. Anyway, so that's what I've been. Our son, we have one child, Elliot, who will be 43 in November, this month, 43 in this month. In fact, this coming Friday. Yeah. And Elliot and his wife Katie live in Arlington, Virginia. So that's what I've been doing. Flunked retirement, and we started off early in the retirement of traveling, and then obviously very quickly realized we couldn't continue doing that. So that's where we are.
Our youngest will be 44 in December.
Yeah.
And, all that happens awful quickly, but I admire your consistent love for Beverly. It's been something beautiful to watch, to tell you the truth, Bill, and I'm sure very difficult at the same time.
Thank you.
So, hey, thanks for coming.
My joy, my pleasure. Yeah, folks of St. Mark's, glad to finally be in your wonderful building. And yeah.
I'll take you upstairs and show you the sanctuary in a minute. So we'll be back. Don't have a plan now that the holidays are getting close. Oh, yes. John has reminded me that it's extremely important that you subscribe to YouTube when you go on it. It helps us. In what way, John? Go ahead and talk.
Well, it helps us to establish our brand and our visibility on YouTube. And once we hit 100 subscribers, we can do things like change our channel URL. And that, among other things, will help to make our channel easier to find.
Gotcha. So it's a good thing if we subscribe, and we're pushing 60, I think, is the number we're at. Yeah, we need 100, but we're pushing 60.
We're somewhere around 60.
So please, if you're watching this, while you're at it, hit the subscribe button, and that will help us all. So we'll see you sometime soon. Not real sure with what, but we hope it will be meaningful. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Joy.